Hey everyone, we are back for another episode of Life Possible with a Disability. I'm excited to have my friend and coworker Susan Johnson Taylor. She is an occupational therapist and she is the director of training and education for Numotion. I started almost 7 years ago, and she was an instructor at the time, and she was teaching. Um, I think it was an ATP boot camp, and so I got to be a student. And even though I'd been a wheelchair user at that point for about 28 years, Susan taught me so much about the process of creating a custom wheelchair and how the therapist and the ATP play roles in that process. And I'm thrilled to have her as my guest today while we kind of demystify that process to a degree. So, welcome, Susan, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. As you said, I'm an occupational therapist. I've been working in the field of seating and wheel mobility for over 40 years. Most of that 40 years was clinic based. So I do have a great deal of clinical experience, which means my clients have taught me a lot.
Mhm.
And the balance of the years has been doing education and projects and things like that. And I currently do an outcomes project for Numotion.
Yes, and yeah, we're really, really lucky to have her, and I'm thrilled to have her help us demystify this process. So, um, as we've spoken about many times, and anyone who's been through the process knows it's complicated. And everything that happens in the process of creating a custom wheelchair is so important and key to how the continued health of the person, and then how they function in their environment. So I think helping the consumer understand how they can be helpful in this
Mhm.
process would be beneficial to everyone.
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about the consumer, the process, what professionals are involved, et cetera, I think it's important to sort of divide people into folks who are experienced wheelchair users, because that's a very different evaluation. And
Mhm.
then people who are not experienced or have never used a wheelchair before. Having worked in an outpatient clinic that also served inpatients, I've had the opportunity to do both. So I think I think the biggest thing, and this has more to do actually with experienced wheelchair users. The way that the client can be useful is to be completely honest about what they like, what they don't like, what works, what absolutely does not work. And I say that, and every time I teach therapists and every time I talk to therapists, I say a good portion of the folks that you see are almost sort of beaten down by the medical system,
Yeah.
because some in the medical system, just have dictums and this is the way, blah blah blah. Any questions? No. Okay, I'll see you later.
Yeah.
And just become very agreeable, which is not good. I do not want a client sitting in front of me that we're having a conversation and I'm trying to figure out what their needs are, who is just going to agree with everything I say. That provides a chair that would work for me, but not them.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes it's like when okay, I mean, so a brand new user who doesn't know anything obviously needs tons of guidance from the
Yes.
therapist, um, or in the ATP. But
Yes.
a- as you become a more experienced wheelchair user, I do see the process as a bit of a negotiation, um, because there are sometimes where the therapist will say, "Look, well, what I notice is." Like very specifically, I lean to the right. You notice that right away, and when you pushed me into midline, held me, just kind of guided me into a midline position, I felt destabilized. And
Balance. Yeah.
um yeah, so in order to so you could see that on my face, right?
Hmm.
um And
very clearly.
yeah, yeah. And we took pictures of it and we shared it with a lot of people to show them. You were like, look, her nonverbal says she's a little freaked out and uncomfortable. But
Mhm.
but if we don't do anything about it, then we get a further skeletal deformity or a problem, or leaning to the right where I'm like have end up with a wound. So it's like,
Possibility.
yeah, I have to be like, I don't know. So I saw it as like, yes, this is comfortable, but I'm willing to take some direction from you because like you know, are the expert.
That's very interesting that you bring that up, because it's a constant conversation, or should be a constant conversation, between clinician, supplier, and the client. Look, we're here. We are experts at what we do. Part of the reason we're experts at what we do is because all along the years we've listened to clients and we have made our mistakes and prescribed things maybe we probably shouldn't have, because we thought that they were a good idea. So my speech is always, look, yes, I am very skilled at this. So as a professional, I have to provide you with my opinion. As
Yeah.
the client, you have to tell me whether or not that works in your environment, and your decision is the final. Period. Because I don't sit in your chair. I don't live your life, but you do. The only exception to that is if I feel somebody's doing something dangerous. Let me give you a quick example. I saw a woman who had MS that had unfortunately progressed. She used a scooter, and to transfer out of the chair, she put all of her weight, every bit of her weight, on the tiller, which is a very not a strong part of the chair, to transfer to the mat. And she did the same thing on the way back in. Well, that's dangerous. And I can't
Right.
say, well, I know you understand. I understand you want a scooter, and I'm going to give it to you anyway. No, that's
Right.
dangerous. That's where my
Right.
professional responsibility comes in.
Right. Yeah. It's quite a balance. And then I I will say this as a excuse me, then a new user, the wheelchair that is first configured for the person, whether that was good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
the person gets quite used to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a user, I know it's really hard to be talked out of that. Um, so I,
Yeah, I'm not inclined. I've everything that I'm not inclined to do now, I did at one time or another, and I learned, quite frankly. But I'm not inclined to talk somebody into something that I'm pretty sure they don't really want. And to your point, that's actually for the ATP supplier and the therapist to sit there with the client, who and the client has said, look, basically what I have works fine. I'd like to, do this again. We'll have a conversation and evaluation, but I want to do this again. There is no such thing as whatever chair, even if you use the exact same serial number and it seems like the exact same chair, it's going to feel different. And
yeah,
people have to know that. Okay,
yeah,
so even if it's going to feel different, just want you to know that ahead of time.
yeah, it's hard. Even like you said, I've done both. I've done things where I've been like, please, I just want this exact same chair, and it feels different, and you still go back to the old chair. I've done things where I've made significant changes, like going from a collapsing frame, folding frame to a
Mhm.
rigid frame. Big changes where it was a really uncomfortable learning curve. There are times when people want to go back to their old piece of equipment and kind of flip flop back and forth because it's like worse than a new pair of shoes. Like
Mhm.
it feels
Yeah.
foreign, and everything you do is harder. Like every transfer and the car transfers, and it's such an adjustment, and I don't think that can be understated. But I mean, I think we've
Mm-mm.
both seen over the years people put their new wheelchair in the corner of a room and not use it.
Unfortunately, I have seen that not infrequently. And you're right. That can't be understated. Um, the, even and as an observation, for me, the more physically involved the person is, the client is, the more difficult it is for them to get used to what we would think of as minor changes in a seating system or a wheelchair. Well, this armrest is an inch shorter than the other one. And while that might not make a difference for some clients, for clients who rely on every tiny little piece and part of the wheelchair to function, it does make a big difference.
So in I guess let's start with like an inpatient setting. Um, what set of skills does a therapist bring to the collaboration in configuring a chair versus what the supplier or the ATP supplier? And I guess you told me this the other day, and it's a good point to make. Both of the therapist and the supplier could be ATPs.
Yes. The Assistive Technology Professional credential is open to anybody who qualifies to take the exam and then passes the exam. That could be a therapist, that could also be a supplier.
So yeah, so it could be um, the I know a that what does the regulation say like for Medicare that I know an ATP has to be involved in the process, right? So the
Well, a
supplier must
supplier who is an
there must be.
ATP, yes, who
Yes,
is an
must be an
assistive
ATP.
technology professional.
And your
But
therapist may or may not be an ATP.
may or may not be. But they're always licensed therapists.
Yeah.
And even though both of those people may have their assistive technology professional credential, they obviously both serve very different roles, whether it's in an inpatient or an outpatient setting. So my role is the human being, body, environment, activities of daily living, mobility related activities of daily living, and understanding that, I mean, that's what therapists do. We evaluate people, range of motion, spasticity, how do you function, how do you cath, what kind of a bowel program do you have, asking obviously very probing
Mm,
questions,
yeah.
because we have to understand that in order to help figure out what kind of equipment the person needs so that
Yeah.
we don't get in the way of function.
OT can be like they may have taken a shower with you. Like it gets that personal. As to like evaluating your function in an inpatient setting, right? They want to see if
Absolutely.
you're safe and functional and like, how what sort of adaptive equipment can we include to make you as independent as possible with activities
Hmm.
of daily living. So it
Right.
gets really up close and personal with your therapist.
Hmm. And the benefit of the inpatient setting with those two complete roles, one is focusing on the person and the evaluation of the same type of evaluation all therapists do of human being bodies and conditions. And then, of course, the ATP supplier is the equipment expert. And when I've been very fortunate to be in these sort of professional relationships, but when both people know how to work together like that, that is a dynamite thing for the client, because you have
Yeah.
two people who are ready to listen with very different roles, but those roles complement each other.
Yeah.
Um,
And we talked about this before we started recording, but like the one thing that I think good therapists do and good ATP supplier does is know a good bit about this person's whole life. So in an inpatient setting, that's a little bit easier because they're kind of living there for a couple of weeks, and you have access to a chart where. And let me give a shout out to social workers because it is social work a month. So
oh, it is. Happy Social Work Month.
thanks. But you have access to the whole chart, and I have access to your notes, and you have access to mine, and we get to really we get to meet the family, hopefully, and get a really good picture of what this person's life looks like. In an outpatient setting, I was kind of talking to you like, how many sessions does it take to get to know a person's life to make sure that when you're choosing equipment and that you're taking into consideration, their car, their home, their bed, their bathroom, their lifestyle. How long does it take?
So that's a complicated question. So it can take an hour. I mean, if I saw you in clinic and you pretty well knew what you wanted, you knew how you functioned, we see what your current equipment is, that's not going to take as long as somebody who is very complex. So if somebody who has, for example, a higher level spinal cord injury, like a cervical level spinal cord injury, let's say C5, C6, and that person now wants a new custom back because they're really starting to lean and they need something a lot more aggressive, and that's what they want to go after. Well, that person also drives a van. So we're not just going to say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do a custom contoured back and let's hope it works. No, that evaluation is going to take a little bit longer. It has to take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
You have There are certain activities that need to happen. And if you skip some steps during the evaluation process, they're going to come out in the fitting or after. It's not like it's never going to happen. So it's, where do you want to spend your time?
Yeah.
Before the client gets their equipment, or fixing what you thought might work and didn't really investigate enough, been there, done that,
Yeah.
after the fitting.
So, for example, like if you do that and then you find out either the person or the caregiver like has to get in a certain position to cath, and now the back is so restrictive that they can't get in that position. And I guess that's a good example of, and like you said, the driving part, like, are they leaning a certain way to drive to access the hand controls or whatever kind of controls they're using to operate their vehicle. And even for a manual chair user, one time I was fit for a manual chair that was like a dual tubed, it was a Tylite, and
Mhm.
the dual tubing, the way that I, as a female manual wheelchair user, was pulling that chair into the car, I don't have the upper body strength of a man, and
Mhm.
there were certain ways that I had to do it and not harm my shoulders, but I couldn't get the dual tube chair across the dashboard without just destroying the car or hurting myself. So there's like an example where like we didn't try the chair in the car before the chair was delivered, and then I
Mhm.
tried, like, I try not to be a wimp about it. And I tried for like a month and then just realized, like, this is not going to work.
Yeah, and I wasn't there. I don't know what was prescribed. However, if the equipment that we're prescribing is a big departure from how the person was sitting, or the type of wheelchair the person had, that does require a little bit more hands-on, maybe getting a demonstration device or something like that. Because again, do we want to do this after the person already has the chair and has discovered that they cannot transfer it into the car? Mistakes happen, and there's no such thing as 100% success rate. That just doesn't happen. But we obviously want to make those as few as possible. And by
Right.
a good evaluation and trialing equipment, we can help do that.
So, from a therapist point of view, like in an outpatient setting, um, can a therapist, and I know this is getting really technical and it's really probably very specific, but I've heard you and Jeannie Hinkle talk about like billing for multiple sessions if you think that's necessary in order to get the right piece of equipment up front.
If I'm working with somebody who is very complex, then yes, you need multiple sessions, and yes, you can bill. Because I work for a supplier, I can't go into details.
Right.
But there is actually plenty of information. I would start with the clinician task force, um, cliniciantaskforce.us, if you're interested in how you bill for multiple sessions. But it is absolutely
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Um, what are some, like, now that we're on there, you had mentioned RESNA. Maybe if, I don't know if that was that might have been pre-recording, but what are some other resources that you think might be helpful to both maybe therapist and client if they want to know more about these processes or certifications that people go through?
If you are interested in knowing about the Assistive Technology Professional credential, then you would go on to the RESNA, RESNA.org website, and you can see what the requirements are. Um, I I've gotten this from clients. I didn't make this up in my own head, but
Mhm.
there's no reason that you can't interview your clinician and your ATP supplier.
Wow.
What is your level of experience with my, and I've been interviewed by many clients. What is your level of experience with spinal muscular atrophy, for example?
Wow.
Um, how have you seen many people with my diagnosis? Have you ever done this sort of chair before? There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I go through the same process choosing a physician. So,
Yeah. That's interesting. And I will say that I'm probably there, you're dealing with a wide range of personalities, obviously, when you, and I probably tended to be, especially as a 19-year-old. I mean, um, there are things that I felt really strongly about, but I think that there are a lot of times where I don't want to question the professional.
mm,
Right. Yeah. So I used to be the one that sort of sat back and, um, um I don't know, there's probably two parts to my personality because I can be really bossy, but questioning someone's experience was not anything that I ever even thought to do because I was afraid of offending them.
so I would not be. I mean, it's it's not like you're saying. So, how long have you done this? It's what is your experience level with this? I would want to know that, and I
Right.
don't mind telling clients. I mean, there are some very rare diagnoses that we deal with over time that none of us have much experience with. Better to say that. You know, guess what? None of
Mhm.
us have much experience with this. However, I have a large network of people that I can depend on to ask questions of.
Right. I think that's very helpful information because I think that if there's a piece of information that I would like to have known as a newer wheelchair user, it would have been that. Like, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to interview your therapist and your ATP, prior to the whole evaluation process.
Yes, and as I don't know if we were talking about this before we recorded or not, but it's one of the things that I always try to get across to therapists is there are a lot of very um, shy and clients who you will see who are just not, they don't want to challenge anything. They'll just
Hmm.
go along with, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Mm-mm. I mean, that therapist and that ATP supplier better be reading the nonverbal cues on that person's face and the body language, not only of them, but if they're somebody that happens to be there with a caregiver, parent, anybody who helps in their care, you better look and see what that person is doing. Is that
Hmm.
person sitting there like, yeah, sure? Or is that person listening and asking questions too? I mean, it's
Wow.
reading the room.
Yeah. And that's what you did right away on my face as you, like, pushed me into midline. Like, I didn't have to say it. You saw it all over my face that I was um not comfortable. Um that's a
Yes, this is not going to work. Look at that expression.
and but can't those, I guess, I mean, most insurances and payers um, uh, only allow a new chair every 5 years unless there's a significant change of condition.
Yes.
Um, and I guess changes can be made incrementally as a person's body changes. Like, maybe you do a little bit more of an aggressive back, but then I guess, is it possible within those 5 years, like, to get a new back, maybe 3 years in, and
Hmm.
make a little bit more of an adjustment.
Yeah, and I think what you just did, which was separating out the wheelchair from the seating system, is a good idea because very often the wheelchair is fine. It's the seating system, the support systems that allow the person to sit up and be supported that need to be changed. You still have to prove that there was some sort of a change, and now the person requires a different type of support or pressure distribution or something like that. But certainly you can do that.
Mhm. I've had to do that before where I did a little bit more. Like I even had a custom molded back for a while. That was like bringing me a little bit more into midline. And then we also changed my cushion and did some overfill on the right side of the cushion, which really did change for me the what you said, the seating system, and prevent any further skeletal deformity or potentially a wound because I was leaning so far to one side.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we made the changes
Gravity is not
slowly.
our friend. Yeah, gravity is not our friend. It pulls
Oh,
down.
you don't have to tell me at 53.
I'm not
I'm
getting
starting
into that
to.
discussion.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I know. Yeah. So speaking of that, I mean, aging with the disability. Like we talked about this before we started recording. I went to the Numotion branch in Baton Rouge the other day and saw my ATP finally. It's kind of like hairdressers never get their hair done. Like wheelchair users that work for a supplier never get their wheelchair fixed.
Yeah.
Um, I wait, like, yeah. So I finally went in and I felt like my foot plate was off. Um, as you know, I have, and Susan taught me this because of the configuration of my original wheelchair and me not feeling stable in it. I started crossing my legs, which put more of my weight in the center and made me feel more stable especially when I was pushing. So I didn't really even know why before I got ready to move in the chair that if my legs were uncrossed, I manually picked up a leg and crossed it over my other one. And the
Mm-hmm.
bottom line is that like you recognize that that gave me better stability and I was more in midline and it made it easier for me to push and it helped my balance. I didn't even know
Mm-hmm.
why I did that until
I
you
only
pointed it.
knew because I've seen other people who have done that same thing for the same reason over the years. And,
Yeah.
again, asking questions. Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Well, because if I uncross my leg, I'll fall forward. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a result of that, and then I just explained to you too, or just before, I sleep on like if you're looking at the bed, I I do a better transfer to the right side of the bed. I don't really know why
Mhm.
that happened. It's probably just how my husband and I slept. And when I first, and that's the bed side of the bed, I got better at doing the transfer on. So now even if I'm a hotel, that's the side I choose. It's
Mhm.
echoing. The so therefore when I get out of bed, one leg goes down before the other leg,
Mhm.
which and so that means that one foot is firmly planted on the foot plate, giving that heel cord a stretch, whereas the other one foot is out like this.
It's
So I've
dangling. Yeah.
yeah, it's dangling. And so after years of doing that, my right heel cord is really tight. And so I went in and said, "Hey, my foot plate's off," which it was slightly not level, and they fixed that.
Mhm.
But then I had to accept the fact that my foot was my knee is sitting higher on the right because of a tight heel cord. Um, you know, my ATP, my supplier, and was it has worked enough with therapists that he like 100% was like, Karen, you need therapy. And I was like, oh, um,
The thought.
the thought I have no time for therapy. Um, but I had to accept the fact that it was less my foot plate and more my ankle.
You bring up an interesting point, because that's also a conversation I've had with a lot of people who want to change something, but they don't want anything to change. So I want to sit up straighter, but I don't really want a back support. Okay, so can't provide support without support stuff. I mean, it's like we live on the earth, there's gravity, we don't live on the moon. Um,
Mhm.
there has to be a counteraction to where your posture is going. So
Right.
I think we do spend a lot of time talking about realistic expectations of equipment as
Mhm.
well, based on what people are telling us. Equipment can do
Okay, so
this, not do this.
right. So okay, so this, I mean, this seems obvious, but you started off saying like the therapist and the ATP have to be really good listeners, you know?
And
And
communicators.
yes, and communicators with each other and with the customer. The the customer also has to be a really good listener. I think that I, I have always benefited, although I didn't really like the answer or the solution. I had to like dig deep within to think, okay, like what, you know, they've listened to me and about what my needs are, and I need
Mhm.
to listen to them because you guys have learned, as you said, over many years with experience of other clients, um, that if I'm a good listener and I'm willing to accept some change, I could positively impact my future.
I think that's fair. But you're the one who has to decide how you want to impact your future.
Mhm.
And believe it or not, that's a very difficult point to get across to many of the clients that I've seen. No, really, I do want you to tell the truth, and I promise I'm going to listen. Okay, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what you should do. What I
Yeah.
don't. That's not my place in your life. But I am here to tell you what my professional opinion is.
I think that's part of the key to why this is such a difficult profession to be in. And I mean, obviously, we as consumers are in a difficult position as well, right? I mean, this is hard. This impacts our daily function, our future health. Um, there are a lot of moving parts and pieces, and there are a lot of, and it's not an exact science. It's an art and a science, and
It is an art and a
um,
science.
yeah. And one thing we did mention before this, which we haven't touched on yet, um, is the fact that oh my gosh, totally lost my train of thought. Um, I totally lost my train of thought. May have to cut this part out. Um, let's see.
I do want to make a quick comment about people who are completely not experienced and a trap that's very easy to fall into. People who are clients who are not experienced wheelchair users, and a trap
Mm-hmm.
that is really easy to fall into because it makes the evaluation so much easier is when they say, and this happened all the time on inpatient, well, you're the expert.
Mm,
Stop. You're
mm-hmm.
right. We are the experts in this. So, with the experienced wheelchair users, it's much more of a conversation about how you're functioning. With completely inexperienced, it's really more of an in service,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, if I was specking out like an ultra lightweight wheelchair with the ATP supplier, there's a million different pieces and parts that you configure all sorts of ways. You have to now explain what all of those pieces and parts do and what the ramifications are of each decision, which
Mm-hmm.
is not easy and takes longer.
Mm-hmm. Like for one trade-off that I can think of is like for the more adjustability that there is, or like, you know, at the very my very first wheelchair, I had swing away footrests.
Mhm.
And the that might have made my tub transfers easier because I was able to move the footrest away and push the chair very close to the edge of the tub, and it made the transfer easier. It also makes the chair heavier,
Yes.
um and as
And
time goes, so there's a lot of times there's like you might gain one thing, and but there's a trade-off, and you want, I think you want the customer to be part of that conversation and
mm-hmm.
make choices, right? Oh, I know what it was. Okay, so when a person is especially new in the inpatient setting, possibly the outpatient setting as well, but especially when you are as my father used to say, drinking from a fire hose of information. You forget a lot of things. So all these conversations we're talking about having in these decisions, like once it's all said and done, the customer might forget. And what are some ways that we can combat that as the professional team?
I think as professional teams across the board, this is probably our weakest link. And not only with brand new clients, but also when you're doing a fitting. Okay, this is how the armrest come off and the footrest, and you take the cushion cover up. Like, okay, any questions? Great, I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Um, I'm obviously exaggerating, but that's probably, I mean, when people come back into clinic, and this has happened way more than once, and you adjust their armrest because they're so low, wow, I didn't know you could do that. And you're thinking, oh, wow. So
I yeah.
there's a number of different things, and there are different things that different people do. Some people film the fitting, maybe film parts of the evaluation, have handouts, have links. I mean, however it is, you need some representation in writing, whether it's on a computer or on a piece of paper, of what was covered, because there's no way to remember all that. It just
No,
it
there
begins to
isn't.
sound like this after a while.
Yeah, and I think I loved the idea because I was in a smaller rehab and we were kind of creating all of our own documents and I used to do handouts, but having a binder is also great because then each discipline can add to that binder and it's in an organized way. It doesn't end up in a like a plastic bag full of papers that gets thrown away after discharge. It's a binder they
Yes.
can refer to.
You're not throwing papers on the bedside table or attaching them
Anyway.
to their bulletin board in their room. It's in one place where they can go back and say, now, what did they say about that?
Mhm.
Especially the whole process. I mean, nobody, first of all, no one believes us that the process takes as long as it does. It does. I mean, you have to explain all of the steps that people have to go through, and the funding and the assembling and the order, all of that stuff, to make sure that they
Yeah.
understand that there is a process, and it's not, you're not talking to them the next day, did you order my chair? Okay.
Mhm.
Yes, I just saw you yesterday. I didn't know it was the chair yet. Uh,
Right. It's not an Amazon delivery, right, of a new dress or like
no, it is not an Amazon delivery of a new dress.
where we live in a culture now where people totally expect that it's going to be like instant and this is a process that is still quite lengthy. Um well, we have covered quite a few topics and we're kind of reaching the end. And I will put all of the organizations that we referred to like in the show notes. Um, and is there are any parting thoughts for for customers? I mean, I think we've making sure you speak up, making sure that it's okay to interview the professionals that are providing this piece of equipment that you will be somewhat living in over the next 5 years. Um,
Mhm.
you know, yeah, speak up. Um, and yeah, anything else that you really want to reiterate as we end this?
No, I think you covered that. Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate it.